And I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's been one of those weeks, Mr Speaker, where sometimes I've sort of shook my head at some of the conversations that have been going on in hallways, what's being talked about in the media. It appears the only workers that this government cares about are backpackers. It's the only conversation they've been willing to have this week about workers is about backpackers. What we've not heard from the government this week or government members this week is any talk about Australian workers or about their jobs, their job insecurity that they are facing. Inequity in this country is at a 75-year high, and it is growing. It's been growing under the term of this government. And it is growing because of a number of factors. But one factor which the government does not rant about or talk about is the fact that it's because wages growth it is at an all-time low. We now have a growing group of people in Australia who not only have job insecurity, they have income insecurity. There's an increasing number of Australians who are worried about not getting enough hours, being underemployed, not just unemployed. For all the rants that this government has about jobs and growth, they fail to really understand what it means to have a good job, a good secure job. And that's because this government is not talking to workers. Instead, what we've seen in the last parliament and now in this parliament is a number of bills that they've put forward to attack workers and basic working conditions. We've seen, as they've shown, only to show an interest this week in backpackers and how much tax they pay. Australian workers have the right to be frustrated that their government is not only not representing them, it's also not talking to them. When it comes to jobs and job plans for Australians, this government has absolutely no agenda, just slogans. And Australians have been met with silence continuously about the inaction of this government. There's been no genuine legislation put forward to protect vulnerable workers, and no plans to address the decline in full-time jobs. Now, Labor, in the government's absence, we did something about it. We started to talk to workers, we formed our own caucus committee, and we started to engage with workers, with not-for-profit organisations, with advocacy groups, with stakeholders and with academics about jobs, Australian jobs, and about the Fair Work Act. And some of the stories from the workers that we spoke to are quite alarming. We heard from seafarers saying that with the loss of so many permanent-based jobs on Australian ships, the prospect of a permanent job now doesn't exist. So for someone like me who wants to buy a house or start a family, there's no job security whatsoever. I could have a job today, but it could be gone tomorrow. We also heard from another seafarer who said that he, as well as 76 other co-workers, wait for a phone call on Friday to find out if they have work the following week. We heard from people who work in manufacturing who have been replaced by temporary workers. We heard from people in manufacturing who themselves are directly employed by a company, but the person working next to them works for a labour hire firm, whether they be an Australian or a temporary worker. The problem is the people working for the labour hire firms work at lower rates. So when it comes round to enterprise bargaining, the workers on the collective agreement are given a terrible choice: wage freeze, cuts in pay and conditions, or we'll replace you with more labour hire workers. This is the reality of people in our manufacturing sector. This is the reality of people who are working in many regions. We also heard from workers who spoke about what would happen to them if this government gets its wish and penalty rates are cut. For a lot of people who are casual and part-time, it's their penalty rates, that income that they earn, that is helping them to pay their bills. If we cut penalty rates, people told us that they wouldn't be able to afford things like their children's school piano lessons, their children's basketball lessons. These are the stories of Australian workers. These are the voices and the stories that this government is choosing to ignore. Instead, continue their ideological obsession of attacking workers and attacking the unions that represent them.
I call the member for Murray.
You,